Well, my son was took the SAT when he was 12 and won the Washington State Chess Championship at sixth grade for the intermediate grades, and then had a very traumatic, extreme form of racism that occurred in a elementary school in Vancouver, Washington, um, that had to do with the principal, and it caused my son to uh, get extremely distressed, and that just kind of pummeled into, by the time he was 17, he was told by the juvenile authorities that he had to get a psych evaluation. And within 30 minutes of this psychiatrist, who had never met my son or I, she had convinced my son that if he would be willing to accept a diagnosis of schizophrenia, then he could get Social Security and he could get money on his own, which was one of his big issues of wanting more independence from us. So he was diagnosed, and he was given I was given a prescription to give to him. He was still 17 at the time, so he was a minor, and I gave it to him. I hadn't been given any warning about side effects or what to look for. I had just been told that my son was chronically mentally ill, schizophrenia. He had what I now know was a extreme toxic overload of the psychiatric drug that he was given, and he felt we had poisoned him, and indeed we had, but not the way he thought. He thought it was cyanide. But he went to get help. He knocked on several doors in what was an all-white neighborhood early in the morning, trying to get help. And on the third door, he felt like he was dying. His description was his insides were on fire and peeling, and a jackhammer was in his head, which is a description of an extreme form of akathisia. Trying to understand why he didn't get well and why he kept getting worse. And it turns out the prescription that she gave me was 1,000% above the recommended dosage for adolescents. It was not FDA approved. That recommended dosage was strictly from the pharmaceutical company. And nobody ever told me that my son could experience such severe side effects. At one time during that 6 months, we went into the hospital. He was in such extreme pain, again, akathisia, and the doctor there looked at the record to show that he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and in front of my son, who had stayed up all night in extreme pain and waited till the morning because I said we would be seen sooner than in the middle of the night. He told me to take my son home, that my son was mentally ill and I couldn't come running in every time my son had so-called pain or whatever. It was all part of his mental illness. I was shocked. I was enraged. And I began to go to conferences and read books, everything I could about the other side of the treatment that's available, and also about the potential dangerous side effects of the current treatment, especially since I learned that there was no real test to prove that my son had anything. There's no drug test, there's no blood test, there's no MRI. The Bible for doctors and pharmacists to determine an illness. It's a vote of these doctors that say if you have this many symptoms for this long, then you have this disease, but there's nothing else to corroborate it. So I started looking into that, and that started me on my activist journey. I was determined to try and find help for him once I realized what had happened and what I had been a part of. And one of the most strongest resiliency skills was to make my voice heard. Because once I started challenging the doctors about what was happening to my son, I read the book Anatomy of an Epidemic, which is an amazing, groundbreaking book. that really questions our belief in the pharmaceutical company as the god of all-knowing around drugs that work in the brain. And so my voice would get silenced once I quit saying, yes, yes, I'll get my son to do this. And I started saying, no, this is not helping my son. It didn't matter what impact it had. I had to try to amplify my voice. So I went on a 14-day water strike, a fast hunger strike. And it was very important to me. And I would walk around with a sign that says, ask me why. I'm on my 3rd day of a hunger strike. I was drinking water. Ask me why. Or I'd be on the bus and people would ask me. And just being able to speak that, to have my voice heard and people hear the other side of the story was very empowering for me. I enrolled in paralegal classes because one way that the system went after me was to say that I was a danger to my son. And they actually got a restraining order, which was crazy. They said I was an imminent danger, and it was all made up because I challenged the system. And so I went back in, and 6 months later got the whole case thrown out on fraud, and I represented myself. But had I not had the courage and the boldness to challenge them, or if I had just said, oh my God, I can't afford a lawyer at $300 an hour, and I'm just going to plea bargain, I would have never been able to babysit my own grandchildren again and be paid by the state, because I would have this on my record. And I do things that bring joy to my life. I love 5 rhythms ecstatic dance. I used to do that every Sunday for 2 years. I would be doing, they used to call it dance your prayers, sweat your prayers. I love nature. I think there are better alternatives, and that's really what I'm working on now. That's a big, big piece of my resiliency, is to get grassroots community people to believe that we have the power to create those alternatives that the pharmaceuticals have lobbied to keep from being funded in the community. There are proven places where people can go, and they don't necessarily have to be drugged to get through a psychosis or a breakdown. It could be just being seen and kept in a safe place. So listening to the voice of survivors, past and present, and working with them to create a better world is my recommendation.